This was the great watchtower of Amon Sul. We shall rest here tonight.
Yeah, and this is the Great Watchtower of Amon Sul, and actually much, much more. Welcome, my friends, to your seat at the table. This is Rick the Fat Man, and I'm telling you right now that sometimes the movies, as good as they are, don't quite get it right, or don't quite put it into perspective as to what the novels and the books do, because there's so much more depth and detail and history to Amon Sul, also known as Weathertop or the Tower of the Wind, depending on whom you ask. This is the Middle-earth role-playing game system by Iron Crown Enterprises. Their Fortresses of Middle-earth series. This was in the latter couple of years of while they were still up and functioning as a company, and they probably intended to do far more of these than were put out, which I'm disappointed because they were getting to a point where they were specializing. They were picking specific locations, not just from a module perspective or a ready to run adventure, but as a scenario for sourcebook material and depth to a given place. And I have a few of these that they created, and over time we will pursue them. And so let's take a look at what we got here. This is circa first edition was 1987. Weathertop, author designer Peter C. Fellon Jr. And of course, her introduction, the Fortress, an introduction to the Fortress series itself, terminology. And then we have our short little adapting and conversion. You'll notice that there's a very small piece compared to other modules and source books, and some that, especially the older ones, have several pages worth. They felt that, I'm assuming at this point you really only need the basics, because if you've been dealing with MERP long enough, you're familiar with how to convert it to your own favorite fantasy role-playing system if you weren't inclined to use theirs. So we have the background. So we see the introduction here. So the Citadel Crown Weathertop Amon Sul is one of the great tower fortresses in Arnor, and the focus of much of the struggle between Arnor's three successor kingdoms, Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur, built by the Faithful Numenorean exiles, led by Elendil the Tall into the late Second Age. It rose from the heart of the Dunedain's northern kingdom. The rail tower housed the Chief Planatir, or Seeing Stone of the North, and served as the principal home of Arnor's High Seer. Few fortresses anywhere in Endor had such significance. Even with the Witch King Angmar looked into the Tower, Amon Sul as the great prize, a preeminent symbol of Dunedain's spirit. So it says here, Amon Sul, a great hill of winds, was revered by men from the earliest time of its discovery, considered a holy place by the early Arthedain. It served as a site for Berg's watch during the latter days of the First Age. Then Arthedain priests observed motions of the sky and read capricious and ever-present winds, hoping to predict future for the refugees of the first house of the mighty Arthedain. Legend spoke of mystical waters that railed beneath Weathertop's rocky surface and a hidden doorway to the deeps. Still goes on. Devastation of Rhudaur, the downfall of Arnor, and the coming of the Dunedain, the founding of the fortress of Amon Sul. It says, though the sons dropped anchor in Gondor, Elendil's ship landed in Linden. His Dunedain followers returned to the spot where their Arthedain ancestors had departed from Middle-earth. Passing eastward from Harlan along the Dwarven Road, they crossed the Lune, otherwise the Blue Mountains, and founded the kingdom of Arnor on the lands of their forefathers had settled in the First Age. Arnor's capital of Anomus and Numenus rose above Ninul, Lake Evedom, at the point where the waters spill out and form the river Beridan. Fornos Ain and Bree grew along the main route. Let's see, Greece. That's a little, right there is a little fudge. Weather Hills, etc., etc. Sundering Arnor and Gondor. Rise of Angmar and Rhudaur's fall, the fall of Cardolan, the sundering of Arnor, the fall of Arthedain, Weathertop during the late Third Age, rebuilding of the fortress itself, Fortress of Amon Sul surrounds the summit of Weathertop, the southernmost and most strategic weather hills. Central Rhudaur, or empty land, located in the junction of Arthedain, Rhudaur, and Cardolan. It commands the easiest invasion route between the three Arnorian successor states. Here, the Great East Road passes beneath Weathertop's southern slopes, through the gap between the weather hills and rugged downland to the south. No citadel in Arnor is more significant or more revered, for it rose from the heart of the North Kingdom, and its size and strength was unsurpassed by any other work of the northern Dunedain. The design. So the fortress on Weathertop was erected over a course of centuries, although the Great Tower and most of the inner walls date from the Second Age 3320 through Second Age 3333. During this early period of Arnor's history, Elendil the Numenorean craftsmen leveled in the hilltop and built what was now the core of the citadel. Their advanced construction techniques, which were exhibited in a massive tower of Amon Sul and the foundations of the surrounding the curtain wall, outlived the work of later craftsmen. All other structures in this fortress pale by comparison. So what basically went on here was that at the earliest moments of the resettling of the region by the Dane's ancestors, the outcast or refugee Numenoreans from Numer, was that they constructed a number of key locations, and this is a very important one. And so the core of the building itself, the outer foundation for the first curtain wall, were either laid or completed by the Numenoreans themselves, the refugees. And then later generations over the centuries expanded and adapted and added on, and later works were far less resilient to time and wear. Their construction techniques were less advanced or hurried, and as time goes on, Amon Sul is actually a collection of the slow decline of the Numenorean presence in the north, and you can tell by the construction of each of the layers of additional defenses that were added over time. So the base gist of this is, of course, the layout and the blueprints for the building. So we have our layout and the outer defenses. Entering the fortress, various towers, each one has a name. Some of the walls have names, and here's one of the gatehouses. Here's Arnor Sil's Tower, Vandalil's Tower, Elendil's Watch, Prince's Tower, Arnor's Tower. There's a beautiful map of. I would love to have something like this in color and potentially mount it on a wall someplace if I had a place to. Well, anyway. Development of the fortress, it actually gives you a timeline as to what sections were built and when, and more additional blueprints. A lot of these material blueprints I also have borrowed over the years for different campaigns, and some unrelated to Middle-earth at all, because they're great blueprints and they're great locations and fairly well detailed, and it saved me a lot of time and hassle of having to come up stuff from scratch. As I got older, I got lazier, I guess. The Tower Amon Sul itself, the tower is a huge keep incorporating 14 floors and 7 cellars, 70 feet in diameter, 280 feet tall, dominates the surrounding fortress. Now think about that for a minute. You see a brief clip of what I assume, that's just me, I assume in the movie we see what's left of the foundation of the tower itself, and that the surrounding area around it extended to become the top of the hill, as well as the various ruins of towers and walls and things like that. There's some stories in the back where later garrisons often would push debris further down the hill in order to create fewer hiding places for foes, or fewer places for foes to have safety from shots from the top of the building or the top of the ruins. Even in the latter most years of Arthedain and the eve of Arnor as the original kingdom, after it was, what's left of it is reclaimed by the king of the would-be king of Arthedain. There's not. It's just a ruin at this point, and but it's still a critical location. And then after that, for many centuries after that, it becomes a gathering point, an almost religious neo-military fortification for the Rangers and other descendants of the Dunedain and in the north. That's a subject that doesn't get a whole lot of coverage, and I've been contemplating doing a few videos and things like this along those lines, so we'll see what comes down the road. But we know the Rangers used them as a place for refuge. That's why one of the reasons why Aragon was so enthused to reach Weathertop, because we'll be safe here tonight kind of thing, which turns out to be false because the Nazgûl were watching the place, and then the halflings inadvertently alerted everybody. You could see the danger, but you could also see the advantage. The fact that from the top, especially if the tower was still intact, the hill is steep and tall, and then it comes to a crown, and then they built this 280-foot tower on top of it. So it probably was 300 or 400 feet tall at the top. So you could see for leagues and leagues and leagues, miles and miles, as long as the topography allowed you to. At some point, the terrain bowls up into the hills and the mountains and the weather hills, etc., to the east, and the far misty mountains and places to the west and south. But you can pretty sure that this was a very domineering location and a very centralized, important place. So we have the layout, the various tower, the walls, what's in them. Like here, the 13th level, Warden's Chamber, the Castle Warden reside here. This door is very hard to unlock. King's Chamber, King resides here on the average of 3 to 7 days a year. Only the Castle Warden and High Seer have keys to the room. The Seer's Library. So, there's important things here and there. A little bit of air in here. The 14th level. Then we get into the garrison. The garrison varies and changes through the centuries, depending on who's in control. Weathertop always been the royal property of the King of Arnor, naturally lords of Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rhudaur also envisioned it as a crown possession. Even in its heyday of Third Age 861 through 1100, however, the Lord of Rhudaur never supplied more than one 7-man unit for the defense of the citadel. Rhudaur often shared the fortress in name only. No force independent of the king or kings who held sway over the hill ever served as a garrison of the fortress. Therefore, units assigned to Weathertop followed a relatively constant pattern. Their numbers and organization very rarely varied. So here we got Arnor, when Arnor was a kingdom. Then we have the various smaller kingdoms, Arthedain, Cardolan, the men from Rhudaur. Other occupants such as dependents and servants, craftsmen, etc., varied, averaging between 140 and 210, give or take. A fortress of this size always requires some craftsmen, some woodworkers, stone masons, people to keep things clean, people look after the animals, and people who can run the kitchens, and etc., etc. Then we have a few adventures set here. So adventures, early adventures, Journeys to the Ruin, Adventures Against War, Fourth Age Adventures. There you go, and a master garrison table. So this is Weathertop, Fortresses of Middle Earth, Tower of the Wind.